A very warm welcome and wishing you all a very happy Independence Day. I am delighted to be hosting the first SciCommSci session for season 2 of our club. To tell you a little bit about ourselves, the SciCommSci club was started in August last year as an effort to bridge the gap between science communication research and practice, specifically in the Indian context. The club is a space for networking, dialogue, and discussions centered around the science of science communication. We bring together science communication practitioners, researchers, and enthusiasts from a diversity of backgrounds to collectively learn about evidence-based science communication. You can find out more about us by visiting our website, bit.ly/SciCommSci. Right. Now, I would like to introduce our lovely workshop facilitators or speakers for today. Rashi Nigam currently works as an implementation co-lead for the MIT Playful Journey Lab, and she aims to disrupt education through constant experimentation in pedagogy. An engineer by education, she also has diverse experiences in setting up makerspaces and mentoring students to solve problems using technology. Prior to joining the Playful Journey Lab, she worked with Intel to contribute towards the innovation ecosystem in India through her work with Atal Tinkering Labs. She's a voracious reader who wishes to create an informed, aware, and ethical world around her. Prasanth Nori is an implementation co-lead for the Playful Journey Labs work in India. He works closely with deploying, testing, and contextualizing the Beyond Rubrics toolkit for makerspaces in India. Previously, he led implementation and partnership efforts for Makeshala, a leading edtech nonprofit in India, and was an elementary school teacher at MA Ideal School, a low-cost leading school chain. He also co-founded Dramebaz, an initiative that uses theatre as a tool to build essential life skills in at-risk students across India. He is a two-time TEDx speaker for the Harvard Ed Talks, and a recipient of the Mumbai Heroes Award. He also has an EdM in Technology, Innovation, and Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. To tell you a little bit about today's talk, so we all know that learning is a lifelong process. In the 21st century, learning must extend beyond the conceptual framework and enable the adoption of necessary skills, aptitudes, and critical attitudes. But facilitating these forms of learning isn't straightforward, and evaluating them is even tougher. How do we help students develop and hone these skills from a young age? How do we enable playful assessment approaches to explore new frontiers in lifelong learning? Over the past year, Rashi and Prasanth have been researching and testing open-ended learning environments and a new method of reflection tools for school students. In this hands-on workshop today, they will lead participants on a journey of exploring beyond rubrics, a new way of looking at assessments and testing. So gather your stationery, roll up your sleeves, and join them on a playful journey through education and assessment. Before I pass on the baton to Rashi and Prasanth, once again, housekeeping rules. We would request all of you to keep your videos and mics off or on mute. And there will be a few activities where you'll be asked to switch on your videos and mic, and we'll let you know before the activities. So without any further ado, over to you, Rashi and Prashant.
Thank you, Siddharth. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and happy Independence Day. For those of you not joining from India, it's Independence Day here. So I hope all of you have collected some sort of stationery because this is going to be an engaging session. And before we begin, for some time, I would like all of you to unmute yourself and think of your childhood game and share it out with us for in the next 20 seconds. So we don't need a lot of thinking, but imagine this is a very playful discussion. So go on and share your favorite childhood game in 20 seconds. I'll go first. My favorite childhood game was volleyball. And I clearly remember looking forward to all the games period in the school because as much as it pained in my hands, that was one game that I absolutely loved playing. So do we have a volunteer who would like to share?
Oh yeah, and chat also works in case you want to drop it on the chat. That also is good with us to read. So yeah, anybody else?
I'll go. My favorite childhood game was a game called Twister, where there'd be like a giant mat with like different color blobs, and you'd have to basically like right hand, like put your feet and hands in different colors and like get jumbled, like bodily, like just jumble with your friends. I don't know if people played that, and I didn't do a very good job describing it, but that was my favorite game.
Thank you for sharing.
Hi,
Yes. Hey, hi. So
this is Maya
this
from
is
Mumbai.
yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead. I'll go next.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. Yeah, so this is Anip here. My favorite game used to be hide and seek, and because I think I was really good at it, and some of those games are still going on, so they have not been able to find me, I think. Thanks.
Thanks, Sunil. Maya.
Hey, Anip, hi, Sai. My favorite game is hide and seek.
Amazing. Yeah, I see a lot of games going. Enacting stories is quite interesting. Samvita. Volleyball.
Hi, my name is Dibjyoti. Can I go?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I basically had a media boy. So like media boy, and I used to play a lot of video games. Like that was like the most coolest thing that I did while I was a child. Like used to play a lot of video games. So I bought it with my like pocket savings, and like that was the craziest thing that like changed my life. Yeah.
Deepjyoti, if I can ask you, what is the one thing that you learned from playing video games?
It's like you like there is like you can keep on trying. That's the whole point. Like it's not like you are finished. Like the point, like you can like still continue trying like to clear the level. I think that was the
Yeah.
best part. Like, you don't have to worry about like failing and something like that.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about failing. We can keep trying and we get a lot of attempts. Keep that in mind, all of you, and we will get back to that point. 7 stones, chess. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We will move on now. This is another round of a little more hands-on. All of you can go back to mute. Thank you. So moving forward, you have to take a sheet of paper lying around you and draw the shape that's been given on this. I have mine drawn and cut here. So you might want to draw and cut as well. You can see my.
Yeah, and just make it like big enough so you can like don't make it too tiny, like whatever size works. Yeah,
We would
something
want
like
to do
this.
something with the faces later. So make sure it's a little big for you to interact with it. We get 2 minutes for this. Cut it and draw it and cut it out. As we all were making, I also folded the entire shape from the sides and made it into a pyramid.
Yeah, and if you're confused, it's a good thing. It's going to be helpful for the rest of the session if you're really confused on how to do this.
If you're done, some of you can post done on the chat. That will help us. Okay, So hoping most of us are done, and the rest of you who are still in the process of making it can keep cutting as well as listen along with building this pyramid. This workshop is going to be about a toolkit called Beyond Rubrics. Before I tell you what Beyond Rubrics is, rubrics by its name is quite explanatory. When you see a word assessment and rubric side by side, we very much understand what it is going to be about. So we wanted to move assessments a little beyond the rubrics. So what happens when we break free from the rubrics and we look at the aspects that most conventional rubrics do not cater to or do not explain in the process of learning. A little about where we're coming from. Prasanth and I work with a lab called the Playful Journey Lab at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which has been working and researching around play-based tools for learning as well as for assessment. When we say assessment, assessment is what we're going to be talking about in depth through this workshop. But they also focus on other play-based learning tools, like there is a tool called ShadowSpec, which uses 3D shapes to teach geometry and to make the children understand how to think in 3D, which apparently is a very important skill that goes missing when we teach geometry in a 2D pen and paper style. So there are a lot of such projects that the Playful Journey Lab has been researching on. And as a part of this very lab, the two of us have been working in India, in Bangalore for the past 1 year with this toolkit called Beyond Rubrics. We've been running the pilot implementation of the kit. You've already heard a lot about us, but just to tell you a little more, we've been in the space of maker spaces and education for the past 3 to 4 years. And our pilot implementation has been with school-based maker spaces called the Utter Tinkering Labs, about which also we will be talking in some more depth. So a little about what we are going to be discussing precisely in this session is, one is a concept called constructivism. Two is makerspaces and the Utter Tinkering Labs initiative, which is running from the government's end. Number three is the need for assessment and customized learning in makerspaces, or even if not in makerspaces, then in any dynamic learning environment. What is the need to assess the learning, and what is the need for the learning to be visible in all of these spaces? Then we take you through the process of, through the whole concept of the tool set Beyond Rubrics and its elements. So before we move on to discussing what assessment is, or to even designing assessment tools, we have to first understand how does learning happen. So there is two ways in which learning happens. One is through instructions, which is the type of learning a lot of us would have experienced in our schools, in our colleges, where you go to a classroom and you're being given instructions of what the correct information is. You are just presented with the correct information, you assimilate all of it, and then you are being assessed on all of the instructions that have been given. That is instruction-based learning. The second kind of learning is through experiences. So a lot of that we do not experience in classrooms, but in our everyday life, let's say in cooking. So one of the examples is that when I first tried cooking, it was obviously Maggi, the 2 minutes noodles. So the first time I added a lot of water in it. So at the end I was able to cook it, but it tasted like there was no taste. It was absolutely diluted. So that was an experience on which I reflected that, okay, there is too much water, so that has to be cut down. I did that, and then I went on to experience again. The second time the experience was too much heat. So this time, because there was lesser water, I was able to burn the entire Maggi noodles. And I understood that it's not just the ingredients for cooking, but it's also the flame and the physical temperature and conditions for which are needed to make that experience perfect. So that is how active learning happens, where you experience something, then you reflect on it, then you make generalizations about your reflections that, okay, in which case it works, in which case it does not work. And then you go on to making those experiences better. So that is how active learning happens. And this very approach, the experience-based learning approach, is the heart and soul of the philosophy called constructivism. So that is the theory to explain how people know what they know. And the basic idea is problem solving, learning, thinking, and development through problem solving. So we do not tell a concept, we make them experience that concept or a process. And all of this is enabled through reflection. So constructivism forms the heart and soul of our toolkit, which is Beyond Rubrics. So when we say that we work in makerspaces, we work with a constructivist approach, this is what the setting usually looks like. All of these pictures are from our sessions using Beyond Rubrics in Bangalore, where the children are independently working in different groups. They're not being hand-held, they're not being spoon-fed, and they go on to creating projects. They fail at them. They spend weeks in correcting all of those experiences, and with little help from us. So a teacher's role in a constructivist approach is definitely not of giving them concepts, but just to be an expert in guiding them through the direct directions in which they should go in order to have those experiences. Now, creating a constructivist space is all right. We've discussed about how important that is, but how do we assess a constructivist philosophy? Because an instruction-based approach is quite easy to assess, that there have been tests, there have been some sort of examinations at the end, there have been some sorts of quizzes at the end, through which we assess instruction-based learning. But then how do we assess a constructivist set of learning? So again, assessment is of two types, majorly formative and summative. Formative assessment means that it happens in the moment as the learning is happening, as the learning is forming. Whereas summative assessment happens after some amount of fixed learning has happened. For example, all the unit tests or the term end examinations. So some of the other examples of formative assessment, as we just talked about the game that Jyoti mentioned, that there is a lot of scope of retrying through the levels of those games without the fear of failing. So formative assessment gives that kind of a freedom to recreate those experiences and to recreate through reflections and to not bind oneself. Somebody is not on mute. Can you please go on mute? Yeah. So games are a very good example of formative assessment, where you are given all the freedom in the world to recreate all of those experiences through reflection and get better at it, as opposed to a lot of summative assessments where you do not get a second chance, which we feel is a little unfair, but it does work in a lot of approaches. For our sake, Beyond Rubrics follows a formative assessment philosophy. Now, before we talk more about our program and program design, for those of you who are new to the concept of a makerspace or of an adult tinkering lab, we would like you to see a tiny video about how learning in a makerspace happens, and then we will talk about what an adult tinkering lab is as well. Oh, and as we are watching this, please post any questions that you have in the chat box.
The best activities in classrooms develop a lot of skills at one time, both cognitive and social emotional. As we talk a lot about the complex thinking and problem solving that people need to be able to do in today's society, In order to do that, you need the capacity to self-regulate, to manage your time and your emotions. You need the capacity of executive functioning, to organize how you approach things, to be metacognitive and reflective about your work. These things are developed in certain kinds of work simultaneously.
Creative problem solving is a skill that we want our kids to have. And the makerspace is the place in the classroom where we're cultivating that skill in our kids.
I'm supposed to make something, and it's like supposed to help people or like help fix a solution.
Alright, so let's go to your design.
She'll get your approval, so then you can start getting your materials and make it.
When you give kids autonomy and choice and really hands-on materials, you have them applying the learning in a way that helps them to gain deep understanding.
If you give children a project to undertake, a passion that they have that they want to find the answer to, they need to be able to organize themselves. They will be using critical thinking and problem solving. And as they undertake these tasks, they're building both the social and emotional foundation, and they're also building the cognitive abilities to demonstrate their learning.
It's almost second nature to them that you keep working on something.
I had to turn this a little because it was going the wrong way because I was going middle.
We send the message in everything we do that struggle and making mistakes are ways that you can learn. The makerspace is a physical place and an approach to problem solving that really lends itself to that notion of practice being important. As you work harder on it and change it and improve it, it gets better.
Because of that, they will feel empowered with a growth mindset to continually get better in their learning.
It's time to take things apart, but we call it take apart, so we can take it apart.
When everything we do is building independence in kids, building their ability to be self-regulated, then you can release to time and interest areas where kids can go to the makerspace and stay there as long as they'd like, because you've built that ability to be self-regulated while doing that autonomous work.
I'll hold it like that. No, I got it. This is like a lever.
We see children as little as 3 years old spending 30, 40 minutes working on a project, regulating themselves, because it's an environment that both teaches them how to do it and is positive and affirming.
That was a sweet video about the growth mindset happening in makerspaces. Before we begin, I think Srinath has something to share about his favorite game. Would you like to tell us, Srinath? You can speak.
Yeah, and also why this game with this video triggered it. I'm curious about that as well.
Yeah, Rashi and Prasanth. Yeah, so it was there. My turn didn't come. So me and my benchmate used to, we used to play in the class itself during the class. We will make paper balls. This is the old type tables which will have small holes. We'll put papers into it, then open our dissection box, and we will struggle to pick out a particular organ called a paper ball. And we will have fun there. Teacher is teaching something and we will be doing our own fun there. Yeah, it reminded me right now. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So you created your own game. Thanks.
Yep.
Yes. And there is one more thing that was pointed out during in the chats, that is it necessary that everything should start from making, and can it just be about exploring and not necessarily about making something useful? Which is a very important point, and the question reminded that I missed talking about it, that formative assessment and constructivism as well is all about the process of learning and not the product of learning. So by that I mean that if there is a child who has learned, who has spent like any amount of time in a process, what we want to focus on, or what we want to target, is the process through which the child has gone in that time. So for example, our engagement at this makerspace was for 10 weeks. So at the end of the 10 weeks, we in fact did a showcase of thoughts. We did not do a showcase of the projects that they worked on. We did not do a showcase of the end result that they achieved, of what they made, but only about the thoughts that stood out to them in the period of those 10 months and what they wrote about those thoughts. So absolutely, formative assessment only does focus on the process of making, and not and it does not has to be conventionally defined as making. I remember Deep Jyoti, who's also on the call today, asked me a question a couple of days ago, that is it necessary that what counts as making? How do we make making open-ended, and any sort of making can be included in a makerspace and not just conventionally electronics or art and craft? To which my answer is yes. It can be anything. It can be from designing something on a potter's wheel to the next iPhone. But we want to look at the traits that the child is developing in the process of building that thing. It can also be just running a fundraising campaign online, but we want to see the kind of skills that they're coming up with. What are the parameters that they are developing? Maybe social, it may be leadership, it may be design, or risk taking. Yes. Talking a little bit about Atal Tinkering Labs now. Atal Tinkering Labs is an initiative that was started by the Government of India about 3 years ago. So this includes the formation of in-school makerspaces, for which the government gives the grants to the school. And we have a huge network of those spaces, particularly in India, all across the length and breadth of the country. So we focused on one of the ATLs in Bangalore, where our engagement was 4 months long, for 2 hours a week. And we engaged with 2 such batches with over 40 students from 7th and 9th grade. And whole of our approach was focused on asking them to go through a process in order to realize the traits, the maker traits that are hidden in them. We will talk more about these now in the form of Beyond Rubrics toolkit, and we will show you how all of those traits came to front by using Beyond Rubrics. And before that, we would also like to talk about what is the kind of culture that we set in this space to be able to implement Beyond Rubrics better. So we strongly believe that there has to be a culture of trust and a sense of belongingness with the space, for the children to feel at home, for them to feel comfortable in their own skin, and for them to be able to express what they really think and believe in. So there are some rules that we followed. There were things like we would do a lot of appreciation for each other. We would set up we would experiment with different sorts of seating arrangements, from semicircular to a lot of other seating arrangements. But we personally found that a semicircular arrangement works really well because of multiple reasons. One is that we are able to see all the children, as well as the children are unable to speak so much, like the backbenchers doing all the mischief back there. So it was quite interactive. If they wanted to speak something, everybody could be looked at the same time, and everybody could listen. There were also other rules, like Prasanth introduced a fun thing which was called a fired up chant. So every time there was a lot of chaos happening, we wouldn't scold them, or we wouldn't ask them to shut up. We would instead shout fired up, and all the children had to just let go of everything from their hands and look at the facilitator and say ready to go. So those are the kind of things that enabled them to have fun along with making, and this very fact led them to genuinely reflect on the entire process and understand themselves in the process of making. So Prasanth will take you forward with the toolkit Beyond Rubrics and its nuances from here on. Over to you, Prasanth.
Yes.
I'll pause share. I'll stop sharing now.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you, Rashi, for that initial part. And I really appreciate all of you asking a lot of questions. The chat box is like, there's a lot of things coming up. We don't know, like in the moment, how much of this we can answer, but like there's a lot of like space towards the end, which we're trying to see how quickly we could finish the workshop bit of it, so we could get into like more open-ended discussion, because I think there's a lot to learn from many people on this group as well. I'm just going to share my screen to sort of get deeper into Beyond Rubrics itself. As the name suggests, typically what we've seen in like project-based learning environments is that there are 2 or 3 approaches to how, whether it's a school or whether it's an after-school center or a learning center or any of these places, how this is handled. One of them typically involves things like all the kids submit a project, then you'll get a jury of judges to come and then tell you, this project is will create sort of an arbitrary scale where they'll be like, oh, on innovation this project is a 10, while another one is a 7, and we know those numbers don't really stand. They're tricky numbers. It's difficult to figure those out. I think the second, are you able to see my screen? I'm a little.
Yeah, we can see your screen, Prashant.
Oh, all right. Sorry, I got distracted. I think, so, and the second way that we've seen it happen often is like, otherwise students sort of are judged based on things like, on certain metrics. So you'll be like, oh, this student is highly interested, so you're going to give highly interested score of 5. And here's a student who is, destructive in the classroom, doesn't really pay attention. So maybe in that you probably give the child like a 0 on your scale or a 1 on your scale, right? And that's how a lot of rubrics we've seen enter project-based learning environment. But the problem with both these approaches is, again, that A, the numbers are difficult to put into place, and B, you can't silo a child into a box of like this child is feeling this particular statement. The kids may be feeling any number of things. And so in that aspect, the Beyond Rubrics toolkit, sort of, if I take an analogy which would be helpful, is imagine you did long division, right? And I love taking this analogy because almost all of us have learned long division in school. And in this group of like 49 people on this call, I'm sure we've all learned it in 49 different like schools, backgrounds, environments. But if I gave you a long division question, more often than not, you do it the same way. You're going to write, the larger number, then you'll put a long bracket, put the divisor, and then you'll go step by step. But what you prioritize will be very different, right? I mean, maybe in one of your schools, a teacher prioritized speed, and they said that whoever does maximum questions in the shortest amount of time is going to get more marks. Maybe in another school, somebody said, I'll give you a mark for each step, and if the answer is wrong, it's okay. Maybe in another school, it was like, I'll give you full marks if you have a good answer, 0 marks if you have the wrong answer, right? So if I were to break down that process, the division is still happening in your mind. You're making whatever learning that you've had of that division, you're making it visible on paper through a certain set of processes. In this case, it was drawing some brackets, writing certain things. And then the local ecosystem, and in your, basically the local school, the teacher, the tuition teacher, or whatever, they decide which of that is more important to them. And then they decide how you're going to score it, how you're going to learn it. So one of the first things to understand about the Beyond Rubrics approach is that we're saying that thing of saying that this is important or that is important or this is how many marks I'm going to give this or this is the score that I'm going to give, that is left to a local environment to figure out. That's left for the teacher to figure out. Where we come into place is a toolkit that helps you do the first half, which is some thinking is happening in the mind. How do we bring that onto paper? How do we make learning visible and then allow local ecosystems to capture that? So the Beyond Rubrics toolkit has 2 pieces to it. One is, I think Maya had a good question about like what are non-cognitive skills. So one is we looked at sort of, makers around the world, some of the most like successful makers. Then we went across like the lab, and the lab did this before Rashi and I were in the picture, of course, but like went across maker spaces in the US, spoke to a lot of teachers, a lot of makers to understand what is it that makes a really good maker, and came up with a non-exhaustive list. Okay, So this is the first part of it, is trying to capture saying, when I want somebody to be a good maker, what does it encapsulate? And those have come under the ambit of maker elements. So we believe that these are like certain constructs or non-cognitive skills, things that help make somebody a really good maker. And they're separate from what makerspaces traditionally look at. Because they're traditionally, if you go to like any makerspace, they're like, oh, if you ask the kid, what did you learn? Oh, I learned 3D printing. I learned how to splice something. Or they're like, no, I learned Arduino and I learned how to connect these things. But they're like that. Those are more technical skills, but they don't really hit it what makes you a good maker, right? So the first half of it of our Beyond Rubrics workshop are sort of 7 maker elements. Again, I need to remind you that these are non-exhaustive. So if you feel like, oh, why is this here? Probably doesn't make sense in your context. We understand it doesn't make sense in your context. If you're coming from a place where you're like, oh, I have 4 other things which are important. Yeah, then those 4 other things are important in your context, right? But these are sort of 7 elements that we feel makers should have. I'm just going to quickly read through them, but then we won't spend too much time in the definitions right now. We have an activity for that. The first one is having a strong sense of agency, the ability for children to make choices around them. And maker spaces are built in that fashion. Usually they make it easier for kids to go pick what they want to, do what they want to, kind of thing. The second thing is following a strong sense of design process, not directly diving into, I have a kit of Raspberry Pi, so I'm just going to start connecting things and then download code, versus like a child who's like, oh, what do I want to build? What are the best tools I want to build? How do I plan that? What kind of, which of my friends in my classroom do I need to actually build and put something like that together? So sort of following a certain process. The third one is social scaffolding. And the social scaffolding piece again is like, teamwork doesn't capture it. The word teamwork doesn't capture it, but the idea that you are growing in a makerspace when you're working on a project, but it's also your sort of, it's also really nice for you to help your team grow along with you, right? And a great maker is typically people who've been able to inspire their teams as well to work along with them and bring something to fruition. The fourth thing is like risk taking, right? And this is again separate from risky behavior. We don't condone risky behavior in schools, but definitely telling children to think about, oh, I'm comfortable using this particular tool, but can I go beyond that and try something else? The fifth one, of course, is like troubleshooting, which makerspaces often, any form of project building, really always gets you stuck, and sort of focusing on a great maker is the one who's able to get unstuck very quickly through different techniques and tools. The next one is sort of bridging knowledge. We found that exceptional makers are the ones who frequently are able to connect knowledge that they found in different places. Maybe while walking on the road, they saw a mushroom and saw some, a feature of that mushroom, and they want to bring it into a design activity when they're 3D printing it in the space, but they're using some knowledge of materials or something that's coming from a classroom subject kind of thing, right? So great makers are often also able to sort of bring pieces of information together from different domains. And I think the last one, and this is, there's no order here as such, but I at least like the fact that it's at the end of this list, is the core sort of content knowledge itself, right? Frequently, we've seen in maker environments that the teacher will spend, one full class teaching you what a magnet is even before you get to touch it. Be like, oh, this is magnetism. This is what magnets do. Magnets are great. Magnets are fantastic, and so on. And by the time you actually get the magnet, you've already lost theory. So eventually also getting these like deeper concepts through by using, while using the makerspace kind of thing. So these are sort of the 7 elements, and we keep coming back to them. A little bit about ourselves. This was the makerspace that we worked in. This was in an Air Force school in Bangalore. And the makerspace was sort of, Rashi set it up about 3 years ago and sort of led it for 2 full years. And one of the things that we did when we entered is that we realized that this list of 7 is too much. Like, we can't do all of this in the space to begin with. And we were there for a relatively shorter period of time. So we said, what is it that is missing in the space, and what are the elements that we could focus on? But again, choosing these is not an activity that just Rashi and I did out of thin air, but it comes from understanding what is it that the school wanted, what is it the principal wanted, what is it that the kids and the teachers in the space are thinking that, these are the things that we wish was really there. And it came down to one, kids were not taking the initiative to come to the space, right? So there was a big issue of saying very little kids taking the initiative, saying, I'm going to show up and I'm going to try and use the space. It was frequently like, oh yeah, there is a space, it's locked, so I'll ignore it, right? The second piece is that kids who were in the space, which was like 5 or 10 kids, were just picking a kit and assembling it. Or drone kit, I'll assemble the drone kit. Line following robot, I'll make the line following robot. But not really thinking up beyond the sort of, ready to assemble kit that was given, or a teacher coming and telling you step by step what to do. But we wanted kids to also think through that process and why they're doing it and ask those kind of questions. I think the third piece again was, we felt that, there were kids in the space, but that even their best friends weren't coming to the makerspace. They were all still in class, right? So how do we encourage kids also to bring in others into the space, help each other, keep the space together, sort of belong to it, like Rashi was telling you earlier. So we focused on these three to begin with. So what I think we'd like you to do now is, I hope you have your tetrahedrons with you, right? It will be really nice if for the next about 6-7 minutes, what we'll actually do is we'll try and inside this tetrahedron, you're going to write down whatever you're thinking right now, right? You've sat through about almost 40 minutes of our workshop so far. You saw a couple of videos. We learned a little bit about constructivism. We had a bunch of questions. We shared our favorite games. So we're only putting thoughts, don't have to be limited to things like constructivism or maker elements or assessment, but you've seen a whole bunch of things. The idea for you is to just generally write down, draw, sketch, whatever you want inside this, in each of these spaces, about whatever's going on in your mind, whatever you're thinking about right now. And we'll take about 5 to 7 minutes to fill it up. Again, there's no compulsion that you have to fill everything or you have to fill a small section of it. So feel free to write down whatever you're thinking, and imagine that, think about it like each triangle is like a page or something like that, right? So you're going to write something. So I have an example written out on this side, and there's no rules to what you have to write inside. It's just whatever you're thinking right now. I'm going to try and play some music, so we'll have that for about 5 minutes. And yeah. All right. We'd love if maybe like 3 or 4 people we could get to share. Again, I'm at least not very good at like turns and keeping people presenting one after the other and things like that. So anybody who feels like presenting, please show us your pyramid. If you can switch on your video and use the pyramid to sort of tell us what you've written on it, anything. Like there's no rules to this, but keep it short for like maybe 20-30 seconds kind of thing.
Hello everyone.
Hi Amita, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So this is what the pyramid I've made, and what I've written inside is, if you can see, or should I read it out?
Yeah, I think you can tell us. That'll be nice.
Okay. So it's like it starts from interest, then listen, feel free, express, motivate, live, speak, encourage, participate, communicate.
Cool, awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think Sudruti wants to go next. You can go ahead, but please remember to unmute yourself and switch on your video when you share your pyramid with us.
I was just thinking of something. Putting one very along with, I was thinking about some raga. Searching for an article, designing article, how to design it. Sky art ending with it. Article name and based. And regarding this seminar, I was just thinking that that science is too vast and it's quite interesting.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Sudruti. I saw Tarun try to share. Yeah, Tarun, you can go ahead. I'd appreciate it if everybody else could please mute themselves because there's some disturbance in the background.
Thank you. Yeah, so
Tarun, sorry, 1 second. I'm just making sure everybody else is on mute. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I really like the workshop and the way it is going. So I was just thinking about because we are talking about beyond rubrics, should rubrics never be used? Or can we have like evolving rubric or the dynamic rubric? Or also like thinking about the qualitative assessment and the quantitative assessment. So even if we take all the maker elements, are we going to assess them as a qualitative way, or are we going to do some quantitative assessment also of that or not? And so on. Yeah. So there are many more, but yeah, limiting to that.
All right. Thank you. I think last we'll go with Bivas, who wants to volunteer.
Hi. So I have written some of the few words I like a lot. Like first is mistake, because we don't celebrate mistakes. Mistakes, learn, innovate, create. And also when I was working in one of the in HBSC, I was working with CUBE, collaborative undergraduate biological education. So I got a term that was introduced called COOOL, collaborative online ongoing open learning. So I love this term a lot because it's actually culminate all the things. So my pyramid.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, so the rest of you, it'll be nice if you can take photos of it, share it online, and things like that. And we're going to sort of move ahead because it's already about 3:50 on the clock. Next again is another activity, so we're not going to leave you that easily. So those who haven't shared, don't worry, your turn will come because there's a lot that's lined up ahead. Our next activity is in fact called Superpower Hour. Sadly, we don't have an hour, but I sort of put the premise of this activity is that often in our context, we had to explain some of these non-cognitive skills or maker elements that you saw, right? Things like productive risk taking or like having a sense of agency. How do we explain these really well to people who, in our trainings that we've done with teachers or trying to explain some of these elements directly to the children? we thought the best way to do it is the toolkit also includes this activity where we're going to actually look at super people, right? Makers, real world people who have actually done incredible work. And that work which often is involved a lot of making, breaking, failing, testing, iterating, and that kind of work. So what we thought is we worked with 7th and 9th graders, like Rashi was telling you, right? So we actually went out there looking for children of that age who've made things even in the absence of resource. Because typically when you see some of these videos of makers and you show it to kids, it may be out of context. If I say, oh look, you have to be the next Elon Musk, that's unhelpful for children sometimes, because they're like, oh, that's a rocket. I don't know how to make an electric car or send a rocket. But how do we find examples for children or for whoever the target audience is, which is more closely aligned to them? So what we're going to see is we're going to watch a video that some of you may have seen before, and for those who haven't, it's about a boy from Kenya called Richard Turere, a teenager who built a solution to certain like human-animal conflict in the Maasai in his region. And so what I want you to do when you're watching this video is to keep an eye out for what kind of like non-cognitive skills that Richard Turere is showing, what kind of maker elements is he showing in his story. And we're going to come back and think a little bit more about that in some time. So I'm going to show you a video right now. So Rashi, can you send the link to this in the chat in case people are not able to watch it streaming? All right. So again, like just a quick refresher, we're going to watch a video right now, and we're going to think about what maker elements does Richard Turere show. In case you're not able to hear sound or anything, just let us know in chat. I have shared it, and I hope it does come.
This is where I live. I live in Kenya at the south parts of the Nairobi National Park. Those are my dad's cows at the back, and behind the cows, that's the Nairobi National Park. Nairobi National Park is not fenced in the south where I live, which means wild animals like zebras migrate out of the park freely. So predators like lions follow them, and this is what they do. They kill our livestock. This is one of the cows which was killed at night, and I just woke up in the morning and I found it dead. And I felt so bad because it was the only bull we had. My community, the Maasai, we believe that we came from heaven with all our animals and all the land for herding them, and that's why we value them so much. So I grew up hating lions so much. The Morans are the warriors who protect our community and the livestock, and they were so upset about this problem. So they killed the lions. It's one of the 6 lions which were killed in Nairobi. And I think this is why the Nairobi National Park lions are few. So a boy from 6 to 9 years old in my community is responsible for his dad's cows. And that's the same thing which happened to me. So I had to find a way of solving this problem. And the first idea I got was to use fire, because I thought lions were scared of fire. But I came to realize that that didn't really help, because it was even helping the lions to see through the caution. So I didn't give up. I continued. And the second idea I got was to use a scarecrow. I was trying to trick the lions that I was standing near the cowshed. But lions are very clever. They will come the first day and they see the scarecrow and they go back. But the second day, they'll come and they say, this thing is not moving here, it's always here. So it jumps in and kills the animals. So one night, I was walking around the cowshed with a torch, and that day, the lions didn't come. And I discovered that lions were afraid of a moving light. So I had an idea. Since I was a small boy, I used to work in my room for the whole day. And I even took apart my mom's new radio. And that day, she almost killed me, but but I learned a lot about electronics. So I got an old car battery, an indicator box. It's a small device found in the motorcycle, and it helps motorists when they want to turn right or left. It blinks. And I got a switch where I can switch on the lights on and off. And that's a small torch from a broken flashlight. So I set up everything. As you can see, the solar panel charges the battery, and the battery supplies the power to the small indicator box. I call it a transformer. And the indicator box makes the lights to flash. And as you can see, the bulbs face outside because that's where the lions come from. And that's how it looks to lions when they come at night. The lights flash and trick lions that I was walking around the cowshed, but I was sleeping in my bed. Thanks. So I set it up in my home 2 years ago, and since then, we have never experienced any problem with the lions. And my neighboring homes heard about this idea. One of them was this grandmother. She had a lot of animals being killed by lions. And she asked me if I can put the lights for her, and I said, yes. So I put the lights. You can see at the back, those are the lion lights. Since now, I've set up 7 bombers around my community, and they're really working. And my idea is also being used now in all over Kenya for scaring other predators like hyenas, leopards, and also it's also being used to scare elephants away from people's farms. Because of this invention, I was lucky to get a scholarship in one of the best schools in Kenya, Brookhouse International School, and I'm really excited about this. My new school now is coming in and helping by fundraising and creating an awareness. I even took back my friends to my community, and we're installing the lights to the homes which don't have, and I'm teaching them how to put them. So 1 year ago, I was just a boy in the savannah grassland, herding my father's cows, and I used to see planes flying over, and I told myself that one day I'll be there inside. So, and here I am today. I got a chance to come by plane for my first time for TED. So my big dream is to become an aircraft engineer and pilot when I grow up. I used to hate lions, but now because my invention is saving my father's cows and the lions, we're able to stay with the lions without any conflict. Surely, it means in my language. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope you got a chance to watch that video without any like interruption. But it's one of my most favorite, I think, TED videos so far. What I encourage you to do is we'll take maybe a few minutes, like not too many, like a couple of minutes, to just look at some of the maker elements on the screen and think about which of the ones we thought Richard Turere showed in his story, and you can type it out in the chat box, and that will help us like get a glance of like sort of what people are thinking. I would like to invite maybe like 2 people to share, people who haven't spoken so far, and then we can just hear from you about what you learned from the video. So ideally, somebody who hasn't spoken so far is what I'm looking for. Want to give everybody a chance to speak. So yeah, please let us know who wants to go. Anybody? I'm going to give you like maybe another second. Otherwise, we'll just move ahead and we'll come back to this later on in the discussion space.
I'd like to share actually, Prasanth.
Go ahead, Revant. Yes.
Yeah, for me, I actually felt like all of these elements came alive at different points of time in everything that he did. Majorly, I felt like, there's a lot of agency because he wanted to do it for his community. And, there's also the element of, what do you say, like designing and planning and taking risks in creating different projects. And for all of this, he applied whatever he knew from the content, right? So I felt like all of these elements came alive to me in different proportions in his particular, the example that was shared.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Revant. We'll move ahead, and again, like it's going to be a lot of open space towards the end to think about it. At this point, we'll do a little bit of a dive into. It probably seems a little disconnected so far. We spoke about constructivism, made some pyramids, we wrote something down, we shared it. So the tetrahedron that you made is in fact like one of our first tools inside Beyond Rubrics, because the first part, the sort of the fulcrum of Beyond Rubrics is the whole like maker elements, right? But what sits on all the other sides is like one of them is stereocraft, and we feel like an exceptional way in a project-based or a playful learning sort of space is reflection-based learning. So one of the first things we have with this tool is it's a self-reflection based tool. And the way that we would use it often is that while children were working on projects, they would have these pyramids. I think you can see one here on her table, where whenever she feels like writing something down while working on a project, either with respect to a maker element, could be her own ideas, thoughts, anything, she would write it down while working on her project, right? So a strong sense of like one of the tools is like self-reflection and thinking deeply about what am I thinking about, and what am I learning, and those kind of questions. Again, the exact question you would ask and all of that would depend highly on your context. And I'll show you a quick, like, I think, yeah, we've anyway gone through like how we write and we fold it. So I'm going to skip this, but what we begin to notice is with some of the schools we work with is you can really begin to understand a journey of a student from their self-reflections, right? So if you see on top, they're saying that I didn't understand how to program the Arduino. And then there's actually a whole journey coming out where this child Asya is saying, we did programming and struggled a lot to get our programming done, but later we realized that the connections were wrong, and at last we succeeded. And I think this is really difficult to capture in the absence of an open-ended sort of qualitative tool where kids are allowed to express and write what they're thinking, right? And so a lot is coming out within this. There's a little bit of a struggle. There's a whole set of new tools that they're learning and things like that. And the other thing that really we've noticed with something like this is we followed the same student about 15 days apart almost, right? About a fortnight apart. On the 3rd December, we're beginning to see that she says that she doesn't understand big circuit. She takes help from a friend for things she doesn't understand. Eventually, she discovered that she's a good troubleshooter with the Arduino and things like that. Already, like a couple of weeks later, you're beginning to see that after identifying her strong and weak points, she's a lot more comfortable with electronics. I think, like, I don't know how many of you have been teachers, but trying to capture these smaller moments it's some of the most magical things come out like this, right? When you're just like, oh, a child is saying they're comfortable with something and they haven't been before. I think that's a big jump. She's identifying how components are different. She's understanding the process. She's following up. So really, we're beginning to see one of the qualities of a self-reflection tool over several weeks when you begin to collect information from children. What seems like random things and random thoughts they're writing are not so random. They're actually telling you a story every week when they sit down to reflect and write. And over time, they actually get more and more focused on something. And you can slowly begin to understand that this is what the kid cares about. The other things that we noticed is we found also really cool, bits of information that you'd pick up, that this kid says, I did a bit of comedy. There's another child that's saying that, I like that Zaid always kept us in time and we didn't miss out. Or, like Zaid made us remember about social scaffolding and design process. So sometimes your self-reflection is actually about people around you, about people in your world, right? Your ma'am appreciated us. So we're slowly beginning to see a lot of other things that probably seem frivolous to many facilitators, but they're really important in the space, right? We all played a game which was very, very interesting, and I lost the game, but my friend won the game whose name was Iman. These are really fascinating reflections that come out. I gave the first idea, I wanted to help. I openly asked for it. Like, how often do even we ask openly for help and reflect on doing those kind of things? So there is something here to be said about, we're beginning to pick up student reflections over time and start to understand, how children are thinking in the space. And that's, in fact, if it's telling you as a teacher what to do differently, then that is assessment at the end of the day, right? It's telling you how you can change your instruction for the child, and it's telling you how the child is doing. Another layer of this activity that we haven't done here in schools, but like we've done with a couple of trainings at MIT, was in a group, kids, after they finish writing, they, like what we did, right? You fold it and you use it as a storytelling tool. You're talking about what you've learned to others. Often you'll have moments that are on your pyramid match with moments on that are pyramids with a friend in your group. And we'd in fact like build really funky structures. So you'll join two pyramids and say Rashi and I had the same reflection, that both of us thought, I don't know, that say Sudruti did something fantastic. So that happened to be on both our reflections. So we'll join that and then we'll add on, and you start to make a lot of learning visible. And it's a really cool way of reflecting and of bringing notes and writing into the third dimension, right? It's sort of growing and coming outward. So that's something we really enjoy. I'll dive right into, again, like the second tool that we have, and this is called Sparkle Sleuths. The idea of Sparkle Sleuth is, it's very simple. It's a peer reflection tool. The first one was self-reflection. So here you're writing something that you really feel like your teammate has shown. So it could be about a maker element that they've shown. It could be, just a note of appreciation. This really built a very great culture in the makerspace in our time over there. So you can, like, what we did is because we were only focusing on three maker elements, like I told you, right? Agency, social scaffolding, and design process. We sort of created our own version of this, so that all kids had to do is stick a maker element they saw in a teammate. They award it to a teammate, whoever or anybody in the space, and then they write why they're awarding it and when. And because of this, we're able to pick out specific moments of time when kids are appreciating each other. It's difficult to capture this otherwise, right? So for example, I like, see, Abhay has written on the 4th December to Anvesh saying he has shown agency. He contributed a lot by giving us the printouts from the laptop. Later again, let's look at, say, Sahil is writing to Zaid for design process, saying today Zaid described as an idea by showing us a rough sketch of the project. And it's quite remarkable sometimes when we begin to see that something that a child has written for themselves, saying, I was a good team player today, you can corroborate with some chits that have come from teammates as appreciative slips to students saying, hey, like, Rashi showed teamwork. Rashi has written saying, I've shown teamwork. So if you're a facilitator, you're a school principal, you're, running the space, you have tangible evidence to show that learning is happening in your space. And I think that's been one of the victories that we've seen really, is we're able to capture and have, very tangible evidence of learning happening inside a space, which is otherwise looked at as being, open-ended. Bacche kya kar rahe hain isme, what is happening, just very random. It's so different from regular class, right? So we'll pause a bit here, I think, to it's 4:15. We'll sort of pause a little bit to think about these questions. One, you've seen a couple of tools now. You've seen the whole like maker elements that it's built around. You've seen some approaches, some understanding. So what do you think about it? Generally, what do you think about all of this? Oh, this is cool. Oh, this is an absolute waste of my time. It can be anything, like however you're thinking about it. Two, if it is exciting at all, what is exciting about them? Three, do you think they can be applied in your context, whatever your context is, whether you're you're working with makerspaces or you're in school or whichever way, right? And what like apprehensions or challenges do you foresee in an approach like this? I think I mean, for me, what I really loved and fell in love with in the first place was that everything was paper based, right? So bringing it into space it's easy. It scales very quickly because you don't need a lot of like computers and like applications and tabs and this and that. And that's one of the things that I felt was really good. And personally, what at least Rashi, like I'm speaking for myself and a little bit for Rashi, I guess, is we've seen that articulation was a challenge. Like if kids are really good at articulating and writing their thoughts, then we got great reflections. Otherwise, it was tricky for some students who weren't as comfortable writing to get out a lot from them, even if they had some good thoughts in their mind. So saying that again, I'm gonna pause a bit here. Would love to hear from you whenever you feel like sharing. I don't know where the chat window has gone. Sorry, yeah. Yeah, so would love to hear from you just in general about what do you think about the tools so far? If anybody wants to speak, just like either comment saying you want to, or just unmute yourselves and speak.
I would like to add on something, Prasanth here. One of the questions was asking that whether the maker elements can be integrated into the regular classrooms. For that, I've already given an answer, but I would also like to say that the 7 maker elements that we have shown so far are not etched and carved in stone, that the makers cannot have any other trait other than these 7. So you can feel free to create your own maker elements, and you may also call them something else if you are not maybe tackling a maker-based problem here. Maybe you just want to integrate Beyond Rubrics in your classrooms, and why don't you go ahead and create some parameter for your own space and for your own context, and then use these tools to achieve those parameters. It will work likewise. Just that we have tried it on the maker elements.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing some really fun questions. One is Ashna asked a really good question about how do you enable students to understand the elements and what they mean. I think this has been a fabulous question, because you can explain it only so much. The superpower hour activity is meant to do that. It is meant for you to keep bringing up to children more and more different makers that they can learn from, expose them to that, and get them to spot some of the maker elements. And then hopefully you'll reach a common understanding of what that maker element is. But despite that, you'll still hit a stone wall sometimes, when children will understand something entirely different from what you want them to. So one of those examples for us is a child who learned that having a strong sense of agency means that he's going to do everything by himself, and it doesn't want to have anything to do with the team, because they're just too much work to deal with, right? So that is like maybe like the understanding gone too far. But yeah, it's a great question, and again, like maybe others have good ideas as well about how to put it across. We feel like exposing them and having a discussion about what elements different makers are showing could be like fun ways of doing it. Rashi, there's another question about can this be integrated online?
Oh, that is something we've been considering post the lockdown, and we feel that yes and no. Yes, because tools like Stereocraft, which are self-analysis tools, can definitely be used online, just like we got you to do one today. And tools that are peer reflection-based tools like Sparkle Sleuths may be a little difficult while working in teams online, or a lot of times children are just working alone at home. So that might not be possible, but in case, let's say Prasanth and I are working remotely right now, then I can definitely send him something in the chat saying, or we may create an app. This can be like a maker project for the students, but we haven't converted it online in any way as of now.
Yeah, Arvindan's question is really, it's personally, it's interesting to me because it says, how can topics from biology be handled? I did biotech. Apparently, I don't know anything. I'm pretty bad. I was at NCBS myself for a few months and I still don't know much. So opening that out in the chat, if anybody else has answers to Arvindan about biology topics and how some of this can be handled. Yeah, simplifying the language around maker elements, definitely. We tried a lot to simplify it, but one of the things we enjoyed and we saw that kids enjoy is even if you give them like slightly harder words and things, it's new for them. And because coming to a space has been new, they somehow just picked it up. But again, like even we know the word sparkle, the phrase sparkle sleuths has been pretty difficult for
Social
kids,
scaffolding was
teachers.
even more difficult. But yeah, it was like a game for them to figure out. And because the children were sharing all of these things about what they've created and what they've gone through, we also heard a very interesting reflection in one of our sessions, which said, I didn't even know that my classmates were so creative before this session. And that girl also mentioned that we don't get enough opportunities to be creative in our classrooms. So I think that is something to do with the constructivist approach and letting them be free. That worked really well for us, along with them sharing and getting acknowledged for their work.
Yeah, I think we'll take another question. I really liked Mamta's question, which is how receptive are kids and teachers. To be honest, at least with the schools we worked with, we had this at least like the main teacher that we were working with in both cases were very open to experimenting. They were like, yeah, let's try this out, let's try that out, go ahead. Kids took a couple of sessions to get into the group because it's very different from what school feels like normally. And so I think it's a matter of like 2 or 3 sessions with students to get them to do this, and most importantly to realize that they're not going to be held accountable or threatened or bullied into what they're writing, because that's the thing that keeps children from writing and being happy with like with a sort of reflective approach. Once they realize that is, those sort of constraints don't exist, we saw that even teachers, students, everyone slowly started opening up and getting really into the groove of something like this. So yeah.
That was a nice discussion. And I'll take you ahead with some more tools here from the Beyond Rubrics tool. Okay? And you can keep pouring in questions here. We'll try to answer them online, and at the end also we'll discuss. One of the things was, also I wanted to add something to what Prasanth said, that yes, the teachers were quite receptive, and along with the students reflecting on the learning, one of the teachers was quite happy that she's getting to know about what the children are understanding. So far, it was quite instruction based in that space as well. So she would just write all the concepts and the circuits on the board and ask them to replicate it. But once she could see all of their thoughts on the stereograph, she got a better sense of what approach works, what does not work, and how much understanding the children are having in those sessions. So moving on, we are going on to our next tool, which is Maker Moments. Now, the 2 tools that Prasanth has talked about before are quite qualitative in nature, where they're language heavy and everything has to be written down to be able to express. But this one is quite fun to fill. So as Prasanth mentioned, there are 3 maker elements that we chose for our particular space, which were agency, social scaffolding, and design process. So every time a child is cognizant of the fact that they are showing, let's say, agency. So in that very moment, they take up this tool. They choose a color for one color for each maker element. And let's say there is a red color attached to agency. So they will color one of these triangles red. The same goes for different maker elements. So as and when they feel they are showing an instance of that maker. I'm sorry. Is it better now? Hope the voice is better now. So Maker Movements acts as a very quantitative tool analysis of the resultant maker elements that we are trying to focus on. It works in two ways. One is that the person filling it gets to know what is his or her forte and where are they seriously showing good results. And as opposed to that, they also get to understand what are the areas where they need improvement. Let's say in this particular case, Prasanth has filled Maker Movement for himself, and he feels that he can see for himself that design process is something in which he needs improvement. The freedom remains, but the results are visible. The results of the process are visible in front of them. Now, these are the three tools. Glad you made this for yourself this fast. These are the three tools that we used in the makerspace. And there was a culmination activity come tool for all of these analysis tools that we used, which is called the field guide. When you go out to visit a bird sanctuary, that is how it was generated. A note of all the behavior. That is where the field guide origin from. So in this case, we use some sort of folders where they get creating in the process of learning across the course of the program. In our case, that was 3 months. So 3 months, they get to analyze their own portfolio and understand what worked for them, what did not work for them. For example, I'll tell you from my own, from what I can remember, there was a boy who was great at, there's some problem with the voice. So there was a boy who was great at the maker element agency, but he was not so great in social scaffolding. He goes on to say that I did not like working in teams before, or I did not like helping others or to take help from others. But at the end of these sessions, he could see himself as a great team player. He contributed really well in the whole activity and now wants to be a social worker. This is another one that you can see in front of you. This kind of a field guide goal setting activity helps the learner understand where they were when they began the program, that is the hatching state. Then where how they were like when they were emerging, what it is to be like right now that they understand the maker element completely, what has worked really well for them and what goals do they want to set for themselves going ahead. Prashant, I would like you to take over for a minute. I have a little power.
All right, sure. So, yeah, so one of the, I think, sort of some good questions, definitely, I've saw 2-3 times this come up, like how open are teachers. It is because we were relatively short-term research project that we've been a part of. It ends in a couple of weeks, in fact, and we've been on this for about a year or slightly above that. In our time, I think we've also looked out for schools and teachers where they were open to experiment. And so a couple of schools that we did work with, as I said, the teachers were very excited to try this out. Having said that, earlier this week, we ran training sessions with almost about close to around 90 teachers from around 27 states, more enthusiastic regional teachers of change. That was their designation. And so in that case, we noticed actually that a lot of them were very, very motivated, primarily again, because they saw that, hey, this is something I don't need a lot to do. I just need to be able to print, or even if I can't, I can just draw and Xerox it or something like that. Right? It's very easy for me, for a facilitator, to put these tools out inside a school. So definitely for the school, it's great. And I think another question that's there is like, we have a structured process for a teacher to become a facilitator. I think there are some out there, but we don't have anything ourselves. We have a slightly more wordy document or a website kind of thing which we can guide you toward, which helps teachers make sense of Beyond Rubrics a little bit. But again, I feel like that the language and things like that are make it very exclusive to teachers in an American context, to the sense I get. But we'll still share the link with you so you can check that out. Or it's available on playful.mit.edu. It's, I think, the first link that will show up on the homepage. Yeah, I think other than that, we have these are some things that we really liked, and we decided to put Will Smith over here because we're fans. But we saw a student actually write saying, I realized that I also have the right to speak like others. And these are like really interesting reflections for us, because they move from being very in the moment reflections almost to being very like abstract, right? They're thinking and they're stepping out of some of their mental models and things like that. This student blew us away again, where he says, I felt there's no stop point in design process. And we never really like spoke about, continuously improving designs or any of those kind of things. But seeing that a student also realized that, I can just endlessly keep improving this and I have to stop somewhere, but there's no stop point to the process in general. I think these are slowly beginning to tell us that students can do a lot more than we give them credit for. And they're also able to think in a lot more dimensions than what we're able to give them credit for. So yeah, I think the sort of the large chunk of our workshop sort of comes in here. You can download this. This is a link for you to download the toolkit. A couple of things we want to tell you is that the toolkit is open source. So you can download it, remix it, use it however you want to. But definitely tell the folks at the lab or tell us what you're doing, because it's always nice to be able to share with others what like new ways and new methods you're attempting with these tools and how you're integrating them into your like practice. Yeah, I mean, this is Rashi's email ID, my email ID. Rashi, do you have anything else to add?
I only wanted to say one more thing at the point where you showed the testimonials, that one of the realizations that have stood out to me is that all these self-reflection tools especially work wonders with children who are not so outspoken and who are a little shy, which is something one of the teachers that we trained also pointed out. And I have personally been somebody who couldn't speak a lot in social gatherings for a very long time in my life. So, and until you get to express yourselves as you are, the realization and the reinforcement of those skills doesn't happen at a lot of times. I believe that point particularly has stood out to me in this entire process, and I wanted to share the same. So yeah, the floor is open for all of you to share, volunteer and share. What do you think you would like to do in your own context? That can be anything that can be related to a makerspace, to homeschooling, or for any other thing in your personal context. How would you like to implement these, or what are the aspects that stood out to you?
I think Sudhruti wants to share an experience of hers from Montessori. So yeah, you can go ahead, unmute yourself, hold the mic close to you and share, and we'd love to hear.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mark. The thing was, I had my genetics as my bachelor's subject, and the thing was, I did my project on behavior genetics in Montessori teaching schools, or traditional teaching school that was in Playful and an Anganwadi. So what difference, what I found was that this Anganwadis and this play schools still have the same old method of teaching with a very traditional way. And in some of the parts, they were made to sit on the floor. They didn't have desks or benches and all. While in Montessori, as its updated form of schooling, that kids were let off free to do whatever they want, and there was some kind of freedom with those kids what were lacking in this play home traditional school. So when there was the first video which was made regarding this school stuff and all that was the thing reminded me. So I just wanted to share this. And thanks for such a beautiful video. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shruti, for sharing. Although your voice was breaking a little bit, I would request you to also type it if it's not too much to ask. But thank you for sharing.
May I?
Have some. Yes, please, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Purna. Let me put down. And we had done a training session for teachers online because of the COVID situation. We used breakout rooms and put the teachers in groups for an activity. And before they got into the breakout room, we had talked to them, let one person be a documenter, amongst yourselves, you decide who's going to come back into the main room and be a presenter and so on and so forth. Once they got into they talk to and just amongst yourselves think about how did the work of somebody in your team really help you. But I like the idea of also doing self-reflection, which is something we didn't do. So that's something that I'll add into our kitty. Thank you for sharing. There were some great ideas out here that I can see ourselves using. And I think there are quite a few strategies that you mentioned that can be used online as well. You just might have to tweak them to suit an online scenario.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, we're always excited to hear more about, if you do use it in a training session and how it's going to play out. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
It's open sort of space for anyone to even if you have, something that you think somebody else on the group might be able to help you out with, feel free to share.
So I have a question, Rashi and Prasanth. So have you had any experiences of teachers coming back to you and sharing experiences of how it has been once you guys have left and they've continued using these resources? So would you have any stories to share about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have not there has been unfortunately no follow-up as of now because of the entire lockdown situation that suddenly came through. But I still have an instance that a teacher shared with me while, as I mentioned, the showcase of thoughts that we did in one of these spaces. So all the school teachers came to attend the showcase, and one of the teachers mentioned to me that it's remarkable to see the kind of energy and the structure that the participants are showing here in the makerspace that was nowhere to be seen in the classroom for the same set of students. So they were quite astonished with all the results that freedom has gotten to us. That is one moment that has stood out to me. But otherwise, we have recently trained a lot of teachers in adult tinkering labs in the past week, and we've gotten some good feedback about it. So we're looking forward to the results from there. Shan, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think so that, I mean, I had similar things to say in general, but what Rashi and I have done is at least we've tried to sort of do some evangelizing of it amongst maker communities and organizations in the maker sort of context, even though we haven't sort of heard back a lot. I'd love to take an example of an organization that that's an NGO that does maker related work called Inquilab Foundation that a few friends run. So there, I think one of the cool things has been that they took a lot of the maker elements, and some of them are now integrated into the core sort of values that their organization focuses on when working with kids. So I think that was really interesting to see that, especially productive risk taking is not something that many people have seen, I think. So that's been a helpful addition to their maker toolkit. I think the second thing that I've heard from Inquilab again was was that this whole idea of peer reflection, it's now going to be sort of embedded into a set of workbooks that kids get. So they actually have to tear a peer reflection out of the workbook and give it to a friend kind of thing. So so it's been interesting to see, like, I mean, there's not been anything like concrete that we've heard back saying, oh, this and that. But again, we're also a little bit, how do you put it, we're a little skeptical of also getting responses that say, oh, मैं पहले बहुत दुखी था, my whole world was sad, but thanks to Beyond Rubrics, I'm the greatest person on the planet. So sometimes we also feel with trainings that that teachers tend to not give us very like straightforward students or teachers don't give us very straightforward like feedback, right? They're like, oh wow, you guys are from MIT, so let's just say that my whole world is better now because of this. So yeah, I don't know if these answers were helpful, but if any of you do apply it, we're more than excited to hear from some like authentic feedback on how it was to actually implement some of these tools.
That sounds wonderful. So just picking up on what you said, that teachers feel it's wonderful for that duration of their session, or immediately after it. I just wanted to pick your brains and know what you think about where we are in the Indian ecosystem, or in the Indian context, in terms of making informal learning, or things like what you guys do, more mainstream. It's a little pointed question, but I would be remiss if I let you go without answering that. So just if you have any thoughts on where you think India is headed in terms of, because right now the national education policy is also being talked about a lot. Again, not saying anything good or bad, but there's a lot of interesting things there. So just, I mean, going a little off topic, I know, but I mean, what are your thoughts on where we're headed and how much we need to do more?
I have sadly too much to say, but I'm going to try and restrict some of those thoughts, like sort of at least like.
We have 20 minutes, please.
Short. Yeah, they'll shorten the length of some of those. So I feel like, especially with the new education policy and sort of some of these conversations, one, with approaches like ours, there's a big question of like, are teachers prepared for something like this inside the classroom, right? And often when we think of our teachers prepared, we're only thinking of two things, right? One, a lot of us are thinking about, or does the teacher know English, right? Are they able to like speak like they're good, confident teachers? I think that's sort of one of the problems with trying to bring out new approaches, so that like this tool doesn't require you to have a strong command over English, right? You could run it in a local language, or whatever, some of those. So I feel definitely sort of there's a lot of like a lot of like myths that have to be broken before you're able to actually push some of these attempts, into schools, into more teachers. So I think one of those primarily is this perception of a government school teacher that exists for many people, right? So actually breaking those and being willing to engage and being willing to slowly try and improve, that's definitely a challenge. I think the second piece is a lot of times with teachers, with schools, with school leaders, all of that, is their own willingness to implement or put in new initiatives, new ideas. And that always comes with a certain touch of, a lot of caution when they enter like if a new vendor goes to a school, if Rashi and I went to a new school, a lot of caution that's there before they say yes to, yeah, maybe we should allow them to work, not allow them to work, and things like that. A lot of times, because when they hear things like this, they're like, oh, this is not for us. Like, oh, this sounds like something for a fancy school. This sounds like something for the US kind of thing. So maybe even breaking some of those myths and barriers that, even if you're in a really low resource school, you can try these out. And again, like the reason why we're in a position to share is also because we're not in like ivory thrones. Rashi's built literally, physically, brick by brick, tried to figure out how to build a makerspace in a public school. I've taught and worked with government schools for a pretty long time now. So I feel like just knowing that it's doable, it having that sense of, yeah, you can do it. I think that is missing on the teachers and school side, because there's a lot of skepticism that, oh, I shouldn't even bother. So I don't know if this is helpful, but like I'm saying, one, external sort of perception, and two, like internal perceptions about what you can and can't do.
And there's another aspect attached to it, which a lot of us miss out on. Just like there are programs, maker programs that are there. For example, Utter Tinkering Lab being the largest one in India right now. But we have to ask, since there are 33 good people here, and a lot of us might be some sort of decision makers with the government or in private organizations having their own makerspaces. What is the kind of privilege that we are giving to the teachers is the question here. We are saying that we are spending a lot of money in maker programs in the country. The government can go on and boast about it. But other than giving the grant to the schools, which no part of it essentially goes to the teachers for all their efforts. And also there is no freedom really attached with the teachers in the schools. So in the past 2-3 years, I have met scores of teachers who are really passionate, who are there to bring about a change and who feel for education. But they cry their hearts out when asked about the kind of recognition they are getting for all their efforts, or the kind of freedom they are getting for all the plannings that they have for the space. So just rolling out a program and putting in a lot of money is doing us absolutely no good, and I can vouch for it. Showing a number that there are 11,000 makerspaces is going to do no good to the integration of making, as you asked, Siddharth, in the curriculum in any way, I would say.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those insights. No, I completely agree with you that there's a lot that is planned and meant to be, but it often doesn't get implemented at the grassroots. So there's a lot that needs to be done, as you have pointed out. Would anybody else have any questions? So I would encourage all of you to ask questions about how you can use similar toolkits or similar approaches in what you are doing. So if you're doing something slightly different from education or pedagogy, if you have questions on implementing these, please ask them.
Yeah, yes, this is Manohar. I have a question. So what I gathered from this is like you had designed a lot of interesting assessment rubrics for non-cognitive skills. Do you think like it is much more challenging to design the same set of or slightly modified ones for cognitive skills as well? Because I use this research-based pedagogy method for teaching both school students and college students, and the idea that for reflection that the students need to realize what kind of cognitive skills that they are developing is a bit challenging for me, especially with the school kids. They like to do things off and see it happening and then just leave it at there. They don't want to spend time on reflecting, and that's a lot of hard work for them mentally, and they're not very much interested in doing that. So do you think these kind of rubrics can make it more interesting to develop such assessment rubrics for cognitive skills as well?
At least from where I'm coming from, my sense is there actually is a lot out there already for cognitive skills. And there's many approaches, many methods that anyway, like I have not really dived too deep into it, but I know that there are several approaches out there, a lot of research on it. Maybe there'd be somebody better to answer this. I'm probably not fully aware, but I do want to address a small section of that, which is like, students want to jump in and make, and they don't want to necessarily sit and do this work. I feel like, at least like in our experience, that has been the case initially. But over time, what happens is that they're actually looking forward to putting their thoughts down. They're looking forward to writing small things to each other, small notes to each other to appreciate them. We remember observing a day when a whole group of very like energetic, noisy boys were sitting down and actually writing notes of appreciation to each other. And they were like reminding each other saying, no, like we haven't written to this person, we haven't written to that person. This guy did that day, we didn't write about it, something like that, right? So definitely I feel it comes down to, like Rashi was initially saying, like how do you build that culture in the space where doing this part is not seen as something separate. It is part of the making process. Like if you're doing something, you're also writing, you're also sharing your thoughts. I think it's difficult to build, but I feel like if kids slowly get into that rhythm and that pattern, some of the things we would do is at the end of each session, you sit in a circle and you share whatever you've written for that day with the rest of the group, and everybody appreciates whatever you've written. So over 3 or 4 classes, what happens is automatically you know that when you sit in the circle, you have to share. So you're going to write things during the class. and you know you want to be appreciated. So you're going to write really interesting things. You're going to write in detail, and I don't know, it just worked for us, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yeah, it was really nice session. And see, if I understand correctly, I think what you are trying to do is that you are trying to make the thinking visible and also the reflection visible. So we try to use the Harvard Make Thinking Visible project, which is really nice. And this is another component where we can even make the reflection also visible. So that's great. And also adding the components of 3D is really nice. My question is that, as you mentioned, that it is beyond rubric. And in rubric, basically, we try to quantize it, right? We have different levels and then try to put some numbers and so on. But here you are not trying to do it. It's more of like qualitative understanding of what is happening. And but it also depends on that, what are we assessing for, right? Are we assessing for the learning? Are we assessing for us as a facilitator? Or are we assessing to give this to someone so that they know that whether they are really learning happened or not, right? So let's say if you are thinking from the management point of view, they would always like to have some numbers or something, right? So then how should we try to balance these things? So that is the question.
So Beyond Rubrics is completely focused on assessment of learning, first of all. And of course, we do not have generated any numbers out of all of these artifacts. And the education system also hasn't transcended to a place where maker spaces are being assessed with respect to a grade, or the activities in a maker environment are being graded or given marks for. So what we have felt is through these tools, there has been some sort of visible learning happening to show to the management as well. As long as we are in a place where we don't require marks or we don't require any quantitative analysis, the qualitative analysis part has worked quite well for us. In our past 5 efforts have focused on creating a sort of approach for this to structure this whole qualitative analysis part. And we hope to publish something soon out of that as well, and we hope to share it out with all of you. But if we just keep it very lay, then these artifacts look like a good enough tool for the children to be able to tell the management or the administration, as you're saying, to show what they have been going through and the whole process, which was something that we saw very clearly in this Showcase of Thoughts event.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we really appreciate how active all of you have been over the past couple of hours, and it's very engaging. So thank you for making it easy for us to share and have a good workshop, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely, appreciate it. I'm loving this, the energy in the chat boxes.
All right. So if there aren't any other questions, I'll wait for another minute if anybody has any other questions or any other reflections or experiences that you would like to share. We have about 5 minutes more. So please feel free to raise your hand or just start speaking, and we can discuss. If not, I'll take this opportunity to sort of once again formally thank Prasanth and Rashi for this really engaging, really thought-provoking workshop. We had a lot of fun. There were so many anecdotes that were being shared. We learned about so many concepts and toolkits in the education space. We also had discussions on the Indian context, and there were so many conversations on implementing these toolkits in local settings. So I think it was a lovely workshop, and we learned a lot. And I think we all can continue engaging with each other. So if people want to sort of reach out to Prasanth and Rashi, you can reach out to them on Twitter, which they have been tagged multiple times in our Twitter thread. So you should be able to find them. So once again, thanks a lot, and it was a lovely session. Thank you.